Hey everyone, this is MusicTechHelpGuy, and in this video I'll show you how I would approach mixing vocals using only stock plugins in Logic. So I recently did a video on my typical vocal plugin chain that I use for mixing vocals, but that vocal chain would cost you well over $1,000 in third-party plugins. So in this video I'm going to show you how I would get a similar effect just using stock plugins in Logic. So first I have the channel EQ here. And typically what I do is I like to add a bit of a sibilance and air boost in the upper range, usually somewhere above 5 or 6K onward all the way up. And then I'll typically boost the mid-high frequency somewhere in here between about 1 to 2 or 3,000 hertz, just a little bit of a presence boost. Then I'll typically filter out the low end, usually around 100 hertz, but it depends on the singer. If it's a female vocalist, I might go a little higher. If it's a lower male vocalist, I might go a little bit lower. And then typically I'll add a bit of a boost just before the cutoff. So let me dial in these settings real quick.
Your love is a life for I realized that so much when I first met you. And that was some time ago. But that into this resist. Said, oh no, 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 close to you.
We'll control some of that unwanted sibilance later. Next, I'm gonna boost this mid-high frequency here. So I'll typically use a more narrow band, and then I'll pull this up, sweep it around, find a point that doesn't over-resonate too much. It's gonna resonate no matter what you do because you're boosting the signal way, way up. I want to find a point in his voice that doesn't sound like there's a sine wave resonance boost there, or at least one that doesn't sound, terrible.
Your love is a life for I realized that so much when I first met you. And that was some time ago.
And then you pull it back. It's just serving as a bit of a presence boost in the mid-upper range. And I try to stay away from areas where there's a really high whistling effect. And if you find your input signal is a lot quieter than your output signal because of all these boosts in the EQ, you can compensate for this right here by pulling down the output gain.
Your love is a life for I realized that so much when I first met you. And that was some time ago.
Now, if you want to use a vintage modeled EQ on the voice rather than the channel EQ, if you want to get a bit more color on the voice, you can try out the vintage console EQ and the vintage tube EQ from Logic's vintage EQ collection. I don't recommend using the vintage graphic EQ. That one's got a bit of more of a direct sound that I don't like on vocals. It's like an API style EQ. I'd never use that on vocals. The vintage console EQ is modeled after like a Neve 1073 EQ, and then the vintage tube EQ is modeled after two different Pultec EQs. And what I'll do is mimic these same settings from the channel EQ up in the vintage console EQ. So I'll give myself a bit of a high frequency boost, around 4 dB. In the mid gain, I'm gonna give that about 3 dB of boost. And then I'm gonna set that to about 1400 hertz. And the low gain, that was around 124. So I'll set that around that same range, and that was 4 dB of boost. And then I had a cut at around 100 hertz. So we can mimic this same setting just using the vintage console EQ.
Your love is a life for I realized that so much when I first met you. And that was some time ago. But that into this.
And then I can pull down the output volume a bit here to match the input and output signal better. Let's try out the vintage tube EQ instead. So I'm gonna just kind of mimic those same settings as before. So the top EQ is your high and low boost, and also your high and low attenuation. And then the bottom EQ is like your mid band. So it's a little bit different to translate this into this. I'm not going to use the high attenuation at all. Low boost, I'll set that around 100. And then for my mid band, I'll boost the high peak a bit and then set this, I'll set it to 1.5K because it's right around that range where we want it at.
Your love is a life for I realized that so much when I first met you.
Cool, it's giving it a lot more body. Let me give it a little bit more of a high frequency boost. Pull up the high bandwidth a bit.
Your love is a life for I.
Cool, so the vintage tube EQ is giving the voice a bit more body. And what you can do is if you really want to, you can still go in here and use the channel EQ as sort of like a surgical EQ. So this EQ is for color, but then the channel EQ is for more surgical things like adding in our high pass filter here that this EQ doesn't even have. So maybe I'll give it a bit more air in the top end, but then I'm giving it body here in the vintage tube EQ.
Your love is a life for I. Your love is a life for I. Your love is a life for I.
Now for compression, I prefer to use 2 stages of lighter compression rather than 1 stage of heavy compression. What I'll often do at the studio is when I'm working with hardware, I'll use our LA2A optical compressor to compress the body of the sound and control sort of like the long dynamics. And then we have a custom 1176 FET compressor that I'll use to control the quick front end transients. So what I'll do is I'll load up not 1, but 2 compressors, just using Logic's compressor. So for the first stage, I'll use the Vintage Opto, which is an optical modeling compressor. It's the closest thing to like an LA2A model you're gonna get out of stock Logic plugins. And then for the second compressor, I'm gonna use the Studio FET, which is gonna be the closest thing in Logic that you're gonna get to an 1176 style. So to start, I'll just bypass the FET compressor and just work with the optical compressor. Now, generally, I don't mess around too much with the attack and release. To start, I'll put it on the auto release. I want a slower attack time for this. And that's the thing about optical compression. It's very slow. It's very slow acting on transients, and that's why I use 2 different stages, one for the fast acting stuff, one for the slow stuff. So I'm gonna let the opto compressor do what it does best.
Your love is a life for I realized that so much when I first met you. And that was some time ago. But then into this resist. Said, oh no, 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 close to you.
So the LA2A and most LA2A modeling plugins like the VC2A from Softtube and Native Instruments, as well as the CLA2A from Waves, both of these have the ability to essentially high pass the detection frequency for the compression. So this doesn't high pass the frequency that you're actually hearing, it just high passes the detection signal. The problem is that if you turn this off, if you open this wide open, you may end up with more compression when the singer is singing in their low range and less compression when the singer is singing in their high range. So rolling in this high pass filter for the detection frequency can help to give you a better balanced compression on vocals. Now, if you want to mimic this same effect in Logic's stock compressor, you can click on the sidechain button here, go down to the sidechain filter, click listen, set the mode to high pass, and then dial in the frequency of the vocals that you actually want to affect the compression. So really all I'm doing is I'm getting rid of signal in the sort of mid-low range of the voice that I don't want to affect the compressor.
Your love is a life for I realized that so much when I first met you. And that was some time ago.
And then I can switch this from listen to on to hear the actual effect.
Your love is a life for I realized that so much when I first met you. And that was some time ago. But then into this resist. Said, oh, no, 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 close to you.
And you don't want to sweep this up really high, like I generally will keep it below 500 hertz because then only the high frequencies are affecting the compression, not the mid-range. So the mid-range is really where the body is, and that's what I want to trigger the compression. All right, so the body of the voice is sounding pretty good. The problem is there's a lot of front-end transients still coming through. So now I'm going to kick in my Studio FET compressor. I'll stick this in graph mode. So what I'll do is I'll roll the attack time all the way down for a really quick compression, and then I'm going to dial in just some very soft compression just to compress the front-end transients of words and phrases. I'll also turn off the auto gain like I did before.
Your love is a life for I realized that so much when I first met you.
So you can see that it's really only acting on the peak transients in the recording. It's not acting on the body, the long notes too much. You can try rolling back the ratio a bit and pulling the threshold up if you want an even softer effect.
Your love is a life for I.
So you can see most of the sustained tones are being left alone. It's just the front-end transients that are being compressed. Now, if you want an even more balanced effect, you can use the mix blend knob in each of these to blend the wet signal and the dry signal together. So I'm going to do a touch of that on both of these just to bring in a little bit of the original dry signal.
Your love is a life for I realized that so much when I first met you. Your love is a life for I realized that so much when I first met you. Your love is a life for I realized that so much when I first met you.
All right, next up, I've got the Deesser up. He's got a bit too much sibilance on his S consonant sound, so I'm going to use Logic's new Deesser 2 to deal with this. So a lot of the controls in here look really complicated, but they really aren't. Really what I do is I just solo the filtered signal. So this is determining the detection frequency for the S sound. So I typically will set this around 6,000 on up because that's where most of the sibilance takes place.
Your love is a life for I realized that so much when I first met you.
And I like to use the actual shelf rather than the band. And then what you can do is just adjust the threshold and the reduction. The reduction is the max reduction. You'll see a reduction meter coming down. That's the amount of reduction. And then this is the maximum reduction allowed.
Your love is a life for I realized that so much when I first met you. And that was some time ago. But then into this resist. Said, oh, no, 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 close to you.
So here I've set the maximum reduction around 3 dB. Next, I want to control some of the background noise in between phrases as well as the breaths. Now, typically for breaths, I use Isotope's RX7 debreather plugin. It's really useful for removing or reducing breaths in a vocal recording. There really isn't anything like that in Logic for a stock plugin. So you can use the noise gate to sort of get rid of some breaths, but if you use Logic's noise gate, I don't recommend putting it after your compression. I recommend putting it before your compression. And the reason why is those breaths in his recording are going to get compressed and boosted and leveled and everything along with everything else in the vocal recording. So they can be really difficult to remove if you put the noise gate after the compression.
And that was some time ago. But then into this resist. Said, oh, no, 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 close to you. See, oh, yes, right from the start. I said, oh, no, 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 I could never part, yeah, yeah. Oh, I I hear from your thigh. I wanna live in your house. I wanna live in your house. I wanna live in your house. Wanna live in your...
The problem is if I set the threshold too high, it's going to start cutting out actual vocal signal. So a workaround I found for this is the breaths that are kind of stronger, like this one here. What you can do is sort of manually cut them out with your marquee tool. Don't delete them, but just pull the gain down on them, and then they'll stay below the threshold for the noise gate. And then you just pull the reduction up to a more reasonable amount, so it just reduces the breath, but doesn't actually completely gate it out.
I hear from your...
So here's another one. Pull that down quite a bit, and here's another one. I'll pull that down quite a bit.
I wanna live in your house. I wanna live in...
So it's quite a tedious process, but it all depends on the music too. You know, some music, depending on the genre, the breaths aren't really going to matter too much. Having the breaths in there, give it an element of realism. Whereas if it's like a pop track or an electronic track with vocals on it, you might want to get rid of all of that background noise just by going through and editing it all out, if you don't have a plugin like, RX-7's Deep Breather that I used in my other video. Now, for time-based effects, I generally like to have some sort of like a doubling or slapback effect along with reverb. So on my first effects send here, I'll use the tape delay plugin. So typically what I'll do with this is I'll take it out of tempo sync mode, and I'll set the delay time to something really short, like something under 30 or 40 milliseconds. So it's a really short slapback.
I said, oh no, I could never part, yeah.
Just make sure that your dry signal's all the way down, since you're using this on an aux channel. And then what I'll do is I'll filter out some of the doubling effect, and then I'll spread it as well, so I get like a nice stereo effect.
I said, oh no, I could never part, yeah.
And then you can also add modulation down here, so it adds a bit of like a pitch effect.
I said, oh no, I could never part, yeah.
And then I'll roll back the send, because I don't want to hear that much. I just want it to be like a slight thickening effect.
I said, oh no, I could never part, yeah.
And then on a second effect send here, I'll just add Space Designer. Space Designer is a great convolution reverb. There's tons of different reverb tones in here. One of the ones I like in particular that's like a really nice just starting point for vocals is the Bright Vocal preset under small spaces. For vocals, I'm a big fan of using plate reverbs. I just like the way they sound more so than room or hall reverbs.
I said, oh no, I could never part, yeah.
And again, I'll just pull back the send so I don't have too much of that reverb in there.
I said, oh no, I could never part, yeah.
All right, so I'll play this whole thing back with and without the effects with just the voice soloed, and then I'll play it with the music in.
I said, oh no, I could never part, yeah. Oh, I hear from your thigh. I said, oh no, I could never part, yeah. Oh, I hear from your thigh. I wanna live in your house. I wanna live in your house. I wanna live in your house. Wanna live in your house. I said, oh no, I could never part, yeah. Oh, I hear from your thigh. I said, oh no, I could never part, yeah. Oh, I hear from your thigh. I wanna live in your house. I wanna live in your house. I wanna live in your house. Wanna live in your house.
All right, so that's my method of mixing vocals with only stock plugins in Logic Pro 10. Now keep in mind, a lot of tweaking can go into this. Each singer is different and each recording is different, and each recording will require some different settings. So think of this more as a starting point, not something that's going to immediately work for all vocals. If you want to get your hands on this plugin chain, I'll leave a link in the video description below so you can download this. If you like the video, please leave it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel to see more content like this. You can also check me out on social media at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, as well as Patreon if you'd like to make a monthly donation to the channel. Thanks for the support, and thanks for watching.